Hello and welcome to Getting Your Money's Worth, the show that focuses on value. I'm Judith West, and our guest today is F.Cox. I can't even go to all his pedigree. Former chairman of SUNY Charter Schools, presently chair of the Republican Party in New York State, lawyer, and 3 presidents, a big background. But we're going to focus today, as much as for most of the time, on the charter school movement. Okay, so you spent the past decade of your life really heavily involved in charter schools.
That's right.
In a very succinct, don't forget we're global here. By the way, we're also in Europe now. Give us a brief definition of a charter school.
Well, you say you're global, and in fact, this is a global issue.
Yes.
And it's about self-governance of our schools. And when I say it's global, we've been visited. I was visited at one time by the education advisor to the Prime Minister of England to find out how we are doing our charter schools. I know that was, until the economics crisis hit, the premier issue that the Conservative Party was going to run on in England, the need for charter schools. And I talked with David Cameron and his staff about charter schools. I was the founder of the Charter School Institute here, which was designed by the State University of New York, and I, as a trustee, was the founder of it, along with Randy Daniels, to implement the charter school law here in New York State. And charter schools are public schools, but they are run by their own boards, and they are not subject to any of the state or local rules with respect to education, except for health and safety, anti-discrimination, and testing. Other than that, their programs and what they would do were designed by their own boards, and then they would present them to us at the Charter School Institute, and our staff would analyze it, and we would authorize them a charter.
I want to talk about that for a minute. So how many schools did you authorize under your watch?
Under my watch, we authorized about 60 schools.
Okay, so tell me something. What was the single most important trait you looked for? You had many more apply than 60, correct?
Oh, yes, we had many more apply, and
right.
Only a few were really
okay.
schools.
So what was it that compelled you to authorize?
It was a good board, because in the end, the board is going to be running the school. And I made sure that I or Randy Daniels, my co-chair of the Charter School Institute, one or the other of us would interview every board that was going to run the school.
Was this board comprised of parents, consumers? What kind of people were on the board?
Eventually there could have been a parent on the board, but the board existed before there were students in the school.
Exactly.
So
okay.
it was more
right.
educational leaders, such as I know Eva Moskowitz will be coming
right.
on, or people like
right.
that, along with a number of businessmen and other people who are concerned about the civil rights issue of our time, and that's inner city education.
Right. Okay, so now we have established that you authorized schools and what you chose on, but you also had this piece, very important piece, called Oversight.
Yes,
okay.
That's right.
Okay, and I think that I want you to add that there is a difference in charter schools and traditional schools, because if they have a window to perform or they get shut. Isn't that so?
There's something I learned from Cy Flegel a long time ago when he created his alternative schools in Miracle in East Harlem,
exactly.
his book about.
And by the way, Cy Flegel's an icon.
He's an icon, and I learned a lot from him back then. This
right.
was 10 years before people thought of charter schools. Right. I was working with him on inner city schools. The most important thing is the principal in the school and the way that school is run. And the problem with inner city schools, the zoned inner city schools, they had to operate according to a lot of rules laid down by a bureaucracy. And the principal school would be, how do I comply with the rules, rather than how do I get these students to learn?
Like the CEO of a company?
A CEO of a company, yes. The principal is the CEO in essence. And so charter schools the board permits the principal to focus on how do we get these students to learn? What kind of program do we have?
So in the oversight process, though, when the school was established and then a principal ran, during that oversight process, did you focus just on the principal's activities or how the entire...
Once you've authorized a charter school,
right.
and then we had the oversight process. But oversight doesn't mean telling them what to do.
No.
You may even see, and you'd go in and you monitor several times a year. You would see how they're doing. If they had a problem, you would say there's a problem, but then they have to solve the problem.
How are they doing, like what? How they're doing in test scores, how they're doing.
Well, let's say test
productivity. What was the bottom line?
Let's say their test scores in English language arts were below the test scores in other schools in the area. You'd say, well, why are test scores low? Well, perhaps the teachers weren't doing it the right way. Perhaps they weren't gathering data on the students that could then give feedback to the students and to the parents as to what the students should focus on. But the school itself had to solve the problem. Now, if it didn't solve the problem after 5 years and they came to us and they were underperforming, then we would not renew the school. We would terminate the charter.
And that is a big difference.
That's a big difference.
They're not allowed to continue to fail. But at the end of the day, help me with this. Doesn't productivity enter into it? Isn't it very much like a company? Are you making money or are you not making money? Are kids learning under your watch or are they not?
And that's where test scores come in. You can take a look at the test scores and see how they've done, the students have done, and whether they've learned what they're supposed to learn. If they haven't, then the board and the principal are not doing their job and have not designed a good program, are not implementing it well. And if it's not really correctable, then you don't renew the school.
Yeah. So it's fair to say you had your bottom line for the schools. Okay. Now I want to go on to the
more
next
than bottom line. They had to perform better than the average school in their district.
So they had their own litmus test.
They set up, and this is what we're going to do. If they didn't live up to what they said they were going to do, then we would not renew that school.
It's almost like a business model that gets funding or something.
I
want to go on now, and I have this here. I want to read now. A study recently came out, Ed, by Stanford economist Caroline Hoxby, and she makes a very bold statement. I just want to say very clearly that this study is considered the gold standard in studies. I know you know the study.
I know this,
but I want to tell you. Because they only measured students who signed up to go to charter schools. So the sample was those students who got into a charter school versus those students who were waitlisted. And that's sort of how they tried to make the study
And it was done by lottery, so the
right.
students who didn't get in were exactly the same as the students who were accepted.
So it was homogenous in terms of the...
It was right. Apples to apples.
Okay. Now, she makes this statement that I think is profound. She said that her study showed that a Harlem charter school, K through 8, could close 86% of the test score gap between them and Scarsdale.
Exactly.
That is an amazing statement.
And it's amazing because these
happened under your watch.
Well, these are public schools, but independent public schools that run pursuant to their own program that is designed and implemented under the management of board of directors, and they empower the principal to then implement that program. Often these schools go for not 180 days as our normal schools, but they'd go for 240 days in the year. Often they would go for more hours in the day. Often they would have a program which provided the kind of feedback and the things that were much better than the regular public schools would deliver. In that way, charter schools are pointing the way for how public schools can improve themselves. And in fact, Mayor Bloomberg with Chancellor Klein, and I introduced Chancellor Klein to charter schools a long time ago.
Really? Right.
Well, they've been going on for 3 years.
You were the matchmaker?
Well, a little bit. You know, he was an old antitrust buster in the Clinton administration,
right, exactly.
and part of this is sort of breaking up the monopoly that the bureaucracy has on public schools. So he understood immediately the concept and took to it, and we were part of that process. But these schools are just very effective schools, and because of the independence that they have from the bureaucratic rules and regulations.
I want to ask you something. Here's the serious question here. Since we have a model that works, and since it's been validated that it works, what is the reason we can't have more of what works?
Well, it takes time. Each charter school, I mean, you know, we authorized them one by one to make sure they were properly designed, that they had a good program. There wasn't one program they had to have, but their program had to make sense. They had to have transportation in place for the students. They had to make sure that the school environment was a proper. We had to be sure that they knew what they were doing before we authorized a charter school.
You know, public schools aren't going to go away, and we don't want them to go away. do we?
Well, these are public schools.
But so how are we going to differentiate? Why is it that the more traditional public school can't learn from the charter public school?
And that's the point I was making.
Do you see any?
That's the point I was making about Mayor Bloomberg and Joel Klein. They know the value of charter schools because their regular inner city schools, their regular public schools, have learned from charter schools the importance of the principals. So they train principals. They give the principal the authority to run their own schools and not have the heavy hand of the bureaucracy on top of them. And that's what Joel Klein and Mayor Bloomberg are doing. And that's why our public schools here in New York City have been improving. Now, other places like New Orleans, they have all charter schools.
They lost their whole system.
They lost their whole system, and this was a way of putting it back together, and it's been very effective.
And I want to say also, I really want to ask you, I shouldn't say I want to say, after all, this show is called Getting Your Money's Worth. Taxpayers get their money's worth at charter schools,
you bet
don't
they?
Because they get less money, don't they?
The charter schools get about 80% of the operating funds that a regular public school does. But as the Hoxby report showed, they do a lot better. They do a lot better. So you get more. So the taxpayer, you definitely get more value. They get their money's worth, exactly.
Yeah. Now, I want to ask you also about, I keep saying now, I want to ask you also about Secretary Duncan's, what is it called? $3 billion race to the top.
Yes.
How does that? Aren't we going to be forced here in New York City or New York State to do a little bit more to perform better, more like charter schools, to get some of that money?
I think that's part of it. I'm not fully aware of that program. I know it developed through a private institution that developed ideas. And those ideas were then were adopted by Secretary Duncan. He is a very forward-looking secretary.
He likes charter schools.
He understands charter schools very well. In fact, he has said that a lot of the stimulus funds that would go for education will not go to a state which has capped the number of charter schools that it can have. Now, of course, here in New York State, we are capped. We're capped.
Cap means you have a limit.
We cannot not have more than 200 charter schools, and we're pushing against that cap now. If that cap is not removed, we will not get those stimulus funds from the federal government.
You know, I don't want to. I want to get a little bit in about you personally. You've served under 3 presidents, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Which 3?
Well, President Nixon, who was my father-in-law.
Right.
Of course, I traveled abroad on his behalf, representing him, and did things here for him. And I also served under President Reagan for 2 years. I was the general counsel, senior vice president of the Synthetic Fuels Corporation, which was supposed to have $88 billion of taxpayer money. We took a look at it, we saw it didn't work, and we eliminated it.
Oh, good for you.
So we say the taxpayers $88 billion.
Good for you. I think they need you back in Washington.
Well, that's what we're supposed to do in the Reagan administration. Worked. It was the largest agency.
Go back. We need some of that now.
And so the taxpayers got their money's worth there. And then under Bush 41, I traveled abroad, and I was involved in getting Mr. Feng Lizhou, a dissident, out of our embassy after Tiananmen, and negotiating with the top Chinese leadership to do that, carrying President Nixon's portfolio. And then I did shuttle diplomacy on behalf of President Bush between China and Korea when they were normalizing their relationships in the early 90s.
So you've had a big, and you know
I had
something
different portfolios.
You did, and I want, and I think honestly, I want to thank. First off, we all should thank you here in New York for what you did on your watch for charter schools, and especially this whole broad background. That makes a big difference when you got into education, because you came in with some different points of view, and I think that probably was a very good thing.
In part, yes, but there was a very great educational leader named Peter Flanagan, who in 1985, after a nation at risk, and we saw what this problem was, a commission report under the Reagan administration, and he started a program called the Student Sponsored Partners, where we sponsored students from the inner city schools into the parochial schools. And we proved that parochial schools, which didn't have to obey all the bureaucratic rules, they did twice the job for half the cost.
Yeah, and too bad we've lost a lot of those parochial schools.
Right, exactly. In many ways, those parochial schools were the original charter schools.
They were like the forefront.
They were in the forefront, and we learned a lot from those.
Thanks. I know you have a new big job now. Good luck in it. Thank you so much for being on the show. You're watching Getting Your Money's Worth. I'm Judith West. We just got a terrific education on charter schools here. Thanks for watching. you.